Hey everyone. Just gonna do a quick little introduction of you know where I come from, my experience and that kind of thing. Just to give you a know-how of how I got to where I am. Okay, so I'm a matte painting artist. Before I was a matte painting artist, I was 6 years as a CG generalist, taking on everything apart from like effects and animation. But so I've been in the industry for about 14 years now. Okay. I started out doing very traditional art painting, oil canvases, landscapes, that kind of stuff. And when I started as in my degree, which I did a games degree actually at University of Hertfordshire, which was in 2008. I didn't actually have any experience of using a computer at all for digital art in any way. It was for me, it was just a bit of Photoshop that no one really knew how to use, some filters, and I think that was about it. So it was very new to me. I luckily I got on the Hertfordshire course by just being very good at drawing and very good at painting, very good at understanding um, perspective and all that kind of stuff. Just good core skills, and I learned everything about computers in that 3 years as an entry, and then as I was going through my career, that's when I really started to pick up speed and pick up different skills and different softwares, etc. Okay, so a day in the life of a digital matte painter uh, consists, we as a lot of people think that matte painting is just the backgrounds. Okay, it's usually thought of as it's the sky and it's the mountains and all that kind of Lord of the Rings esque kind of stuff. Okay, that is part of it, but it's kind of a hidden thing that's not really spoken about, and it's the connection usually between CG renders and compositing. Okay, there's a reason why a lot of the time CG doesn't look as great as it should do. And it's usually one, because they haven't got time, two, because you haven't got someone who's extremely experienced in creating very realistic CG, or three, you haven't had a matte painter to help you out. Okay. So, as much as we do the backgrounds, we also paint over stuff that was applied on set for a film, or we'll paint on top of CG that just doesn't look as good as it could be. Okay, it's much quicker for a matte painter to fix CG than it is for a CG artist to go back, retexture, relight, re-render. All that stuff is, we're talking days and weeks of time, whereas a matte painter can get anything from like 1 to 5 shots approved in a day if they're working super fast. Okay, so so we're not really spoken about, but we do work extremely quickly, and we help out a lot of the film, and we make a difference hugely. Okay, so what software do you need to know as a DMP artist? Okay, usually the most common one is Photoshop. Okay, Photoshop just because it's industry standard. Okay, there's if you're just as good in something like Coral Painter or an equivalent kind of painting whack on me kind of style drawing program, then your skills will translate. But pretty much everyone who picks up digital art at some point uses Photoshop. Okay, so Photoshop is your key one. That's like 60-70% of your time. Maya is another one that you need to nail. Okay, you don't need to be knowing every single button in Maya. Okay, it's just Maya is because it's the industry standard for 3D in films. It's the 3D program that every studio just goes to kind of, if you have a 3D asset, you'll pop it into Maya, take a look at it, see how it's working, check it out, modify it loosely. Okay, so being a 3D DMP artist, you need to know how 3D works. Okay, It's also good to know programs like ZBrush or Substance or Mudbox, something around there. ZBrush is probably the most common one because a lot of time we are dealing with what we call like LiDAR data or super high poly data. Okay. So it's all great when someone makes something in CG and it's an incredible mountain and it's great, incredible environment. But every time you click render, there's a way up 50-50 whether your computer's going to crash, whether it's going to render, how long it's going to take to render. Okay. So we, as DMP, we still need that geometry if we're going to paint over geometry, but we don't need it to be a million polys. And programs like ZBrush are great for like cleaning up geometry, lowering poly counts, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So Maya, Photoshop, and Nuke are your main ones, and DMPs as a general thing are quite generalist. They can pick up programs and just kind of work 20% of the program, get what they want, and then get out. Okay, this is very, ZBrush is a good example of this. I'll use ZBrush, clean up a bit of geometry, get it all working how I like, and then just export it. Okay, and bring it into something that I feel has more control. Okay, so our prime program for being an artist is Photoshop. Everything else is kind of bits and pieces. Okay, so I'm gonna start a shot. Okay, I'm going to show you how we can do a basic shot from start to finish using Maya, Photoshop, and Nuke. Okay, and we're just going to like explain the step by step what's happening and the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so let's get into it. Is there any questions at the moment, or are we going to save all those to the end?
Any questions so far, folks? I think it was keen to get started.
Yep, go for it. Okay. You can all see my screen. Yep.
Yep.
Oh. Okay. So in DMP, you won't, Maya is like an old school version of doing projections. Okay. A lot of the time we don't really use Maya that much as it used to be. Okay. It used to be that you set up the projections in Maya, and then there wasn't really Nuke wasn't there. It didn't really exist, or it was started as compositing and then it kind of introduced the projection side of things. Okay, so I don't really want to focus too much in Maya because it's not the normal program to be using. Okay, it's not the latest way of doing things. Okay, but I will show you at least what is happening. Okay, so in my perspective view, just bear with me. Always using a Mac computer through a Linux machine, which can be a little bit confusing with the shortcuts sometimes. Okay, so this here is our LiDAR mesh. Okay, and you'll get this supplied to you when you work in the industry. If you're working in a shop, you should get your LiDAR. Okay, and LiDAR for DMP is good because it shows us where in space this piece of geometry is. Okay, so if we was to set up a projection, it's all right seeing the image on a 2D plane like this. Okay, but we don't have any knowledge based on this 2D image where it sits in 3D space. Okay, so we need a piece of geometry to tell us where that is. Okay, that's gathered from camera information. And as a DMP, we'd be supply this. If you're working on a CG production, like fully CG animated or whatever, then you don't have to worry about LiDAR because your geometry is your positioning. Okay, so your CG geometry is going to tell you, okay, cool, this person's modeled this front of this building. I'm just going to take their model reduce the poly count or remodel if I feel like it's just unnecessary or it's throwing up errors to reduce the poly count. And then I will know, right, I can put that in replacement, and now that's the piece of geometry that I'm now going to project on. Okay. So this is the piece of geometry that I've modeled to replace it. Okay. So you can see that going from, I don't know how many polys, gone from that to that. Okay. And as long as we match the perspective of things, so when the edge meets that, depending on what part of this building you're going to change, so we're going to work on this area as a flat area, as long as perspectively this part works, nothing else matters. Okay, because everything else is not going to use this, everything else is going to use the base image. Okay, so you'll find that sometimes this guy here is, I tried this in ZBrush, tried to like re-topologize it or clean it up, but LiDAR throws up a whole bunch of painful things sometimes. Okay, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't in ZBrush, and it's all based on how the geometry has been processed and how that's been gathered. Okay, but you give it like 15-20 minutes of trying these kind of ZBrush processes of reducing poly counts or Maya processes of reducing poly counts, and after that, if it doesn't work after like 15-20 minutes, just think of a different way, because it's not going to work. If it's going to work, it's going to work within the first couple of 10-15 minutes. So we have that piece of geometry, and then we have two cameras. Okay, and they both sit in the same place. Okay. So for the purposes of this, I've made this camera move from a static shot. Okay. So usually, let's say for this shot, the camera's going to dolly in. Okay, it's going to move closer to the building. Okay, and on set they would obviously film that moving. So this camera that is moving, you can see the one that's not highlighted. Okay, that movement should technically match with the movement that will be happening on the plate. Okay, so I've forced that to happen just for the purposes of this. Okay, but we have two cameras, a render camera and a projection camera. Okay, and in order to do projections, that's how it works. You work with two cameras. Okay. Let's see what else we have. We also have our piece of geometry. Okay. That is here, which means this section here, like I said, this section here is where we're going to replace. Okay, so that's the only reason I'll jump into Maya, just to do something like that. Like, right, I need a plane, I need it to be in the right place. That's what I'll do. So I know that piece of geometry is in the right place. That's where I'm replacing. Everything else outside of that, not important. Okay. So let's go into Nuke. Okay. So this is our plate. Okay. For the purposes of this, I just kind of used what we call a luminance key. Okay. And if you toggle the A on top, you probably know that it toggles the alpha. Okay, because we're also going to replace the sky. Okay. I put in also a roto just to kind of. Oh. Okay, so now I'm going to replace the sky. Change that. I've eroded the edge, which it just see if it. See how subtle it is. Yeah, it's pretty subtle. You can see it changing there. Yeah. Okay, so this is additional stuff that I'm just showing you. This is not stuff that you'd get supplied, but you would get supplied the plate. And there's loads of different versions that you'd get supplied. You'd get denoised, undistorted, all these kind of things. Okay, denoise is obviously, you know, removal of noise. Obviously, when we're matte painting, we want to work on the cleanest. Okay, undistorted being that when every camera that takes the lens has a little bit of a distortion on the corners. If you've ever seen that, it creates this distortion, almost pulling into the corners. So perspectively, you can imagine we don't want that distortion, because if we're trying to like sort out buildings, being really specific about our perspective, that tiny little pull into the corners that the camera creates is going to screw with our DMP. Or it's going to make it harder for us to match perspectively if we just want to drop buildings in or something like that. Okay, so we have our, I'd hit tab, then we'll flip to the 3D view. Okay. So we have our zoom out, our projection camera. Okay, this is the same as what we had. Okay, we've loaded it in here. Okay, and we've got our render camera. Okay, and it's moving the same as the one that was in Maya. It's exactly the same thing. Okay, and we have our projection, and we put it onto a sphere. Okay, so a lot of the time in production, you might need to work on a shot before you've been supplied the LiDAR. Okay, so to just be able to get the shot into Photoshop, we need to project it onto something. Okay, and the sphere is always a good choice. Okay, so what I've done with this sphere is actually the front of the building is in the same place as the front of this building. Okay, so that it doesn't screw anything up. It shouldn't do, because it's a projection. The movement in it should be very, very minuscule. But that sphere, see it here, I think it's here. There you can see. Okay, so that's the high poly LiDAR there. Okay, and the sphere is in that general area. Okay. Okay, then we put our sphere, we put it onto a scanline render. Okay, which is essentially saying that this is happening in 3D, this projection and this sphere. Then when we put it onto a scanline render, we want to translate that 3D information back into a 2D image. Okay. So now we're looking at the same thing, but now it's actually projected onto geometry. Okay. We can see that by click on the sphere, go across to render, texture and wireframe. You can see there's a wireframe there. Very subtle. But now we can tell that the image we're seeing is actually a projection. Okay. We've also put in these reformat nodes into the scanline, because as soon as you do a projection, we're almost lowering the quality of our 2D image. Okay. As DMPs, we always want to work on really big images. Okay. So as much as the finished product might be 1080p or full HD or 4K in some cases, the painting that we want to work on, we always want it to be at least double the size. Okay. I usually try to push for like 3 or 4 times the size. Okay. And the reason we do that is because, one, it avoids any kind of general resolution issues, okay? And two, if for whatever reason, the camera was to go in much closer than we anticipated, you can take care of, painting out here, and then it goes in camera close and it will still be okay. The resolution will still hold up, okay? So it's kind of to cover your own ass, to save it from, oh, okay, it looks fine when you did it in Photoshop at 1080p, but now the camera moves in and now the resolution of your matte painting is lower than the resolution of the plate, and now you got to go and redo the matte painting, okay? So we do that by having a reformat node, okay? In our scan line, we have our object, camera, and our background, which is what we're going to feed it resolution-wise, okay? So we have 1080p, okay? And then another reformat node, which if you drop down that, okay? So at the moment we have it to format, okay? So our project setting. But on this one, we have it to scale, okay? And all that's going to do is just multiply whatever resolution we gave it before. It's going to multiply it by the amount that we've given it here. So we're giving it 4. And as you see, come on, that's the resolution there, 7,680 by 4,320. Okay. Doesn't really matter what it is. We know it's mathematically going to work out fine because we're going to have the finished product as 1080 because we're going to revert it back. But 7K is a pretty good resolution. Okay. We also only want to work on one frame, so we put a frame hold. Okay. So we only want to work on one frame when we're in Photoshop, and then we've got a write node. Okay. This is like a normal setup. The only difference is this section here with the switching of the cameras. There's a reason I do this. Okay. I don't know if anyone's done any projection work before, but if you've ever kind of watched projection work, they'll use reformat nodes, and then they'll go into the reformat, and then they'll put in a times 1.2, and then they'll put in another reformat to bring the matte painting back in, and it will divide that resolution. Okay. And what that for me is instantly confuses me about numbers. Instantly confusing me because you have to divide the resolution to deal with overscan or anything that's happening outside of the image. Okay, so imagine the camera pulled out. Let's just say we did it for this one. Okay. If we put this down to 25, okay, that's what we call overscan. Okay. So we wanted to paint, it's that kind of shot where you want to paint the rest of the buildings down the street. This is what we'd refer to as overscan. Okay. And reformat nodes would do this through a different process, whereas I do this through the camera. Okay. And it's much easier because all it takes is just changing this value here. Okay. So for this one, we're not doing overscan. Okay. But you'll see how when I bring it back in, how I switch to cameras and it automatically does all that overscan fixing by itself. Okay. Okay, so we've rendered this one out. Okay, I'm going to take this onto my machine now. Okay. So this is our DMP. Okay. So guys over here. Okay. So that's what we had. My apologies, I put the sphere on, but for this purposes, I actually rendered it out with the Where is it? I rendered it out with that base as the one rather than the sphere. That's why it's that shape, and that's why you're seeing it like that in Photoshop. Okay, so that's why I actually loaded into Nuke, but you can ignore that. Okay, this would just be filled in for the sphere. Okay, so it doesn't really matter because we're just taking care of this part. Okay. Okay, so I've found something. I just wanted to close the shutters, let's say. Okay. And all I've gone in here is I've just put levels, hues, look at these settings, had a little bit of a play with some dirt just to sit it in. Okay. And then here I've put in a bit of a hue saturation to vary the color. Okay. Okay, so nothing that special, pretty simple. But to do this in CG, if you were to try and replicate something like this in CG and then try and match it up with the LiDAR to make it look as realistic, could take you a lot of time relighting it, rendering it, all that kind of stuff. This is a way quicker route. Okay. You can also do the same process. This is just one section of the map painter. You could do the same process if you wanted to maybe remove this poster calendar thing going on here. Yeah, you can replace that with the brickwork here. As long as it sits in right, you can do multiple things, and it's way faster than CG. Above my DMP, okay, I have 3 corrections, okay, that are just for being able to see what is going on and to check that my DMP is matching values and saturation wise. Okay, so I'll do this a lot. I'll put a saturation on and I'll just crank the saturation. And all I'm looking for here is just generally that the saturation of my image is matching the saturation of everything surrounding it. Okay, so if I put a hue saturation here, okay, so if I desat now, it's quite, I can tell, my eyes trained, I can tell that this is too desaturated, but it's harder to tell until you put a big saturation on it. Okay, and then you can tell, oh, okay, maybe it's a bit off. Okay, so I'll usually put one of those on top of everything. I'll do desat as well. Okay, that will help me with the values. Okay, just to make sure that it's not too bright, it's not too dark. Okay, so if it's, let's just say, let's put levels here. So if it was too dark, it shows up more on the desatted version. Okay, just to make sure the values are okay. And then again, I'll do combined with the desat because it's a bit hard to see with the color still. I'll have a levels, and all I'll do is I'll just kind of sway between here and here in the middle. And all I'm looking for is just to kind of see if making sure the darkest values here are matching the darkest values on the plate. Okay. Making sure that when I brighten it, you'll see the darkest values here down on the bottom of the door frame are similar to the darkest values here in this dirt here. Okay, so it's all we're looking for is consistency. That's all it is. And these 3 layers can avoid a lot of wasted time and a lot of people don't do that, just because they might not be as experienced, or they don't think of it, or what I run into commonly with a lot of juniors or graduates is that they feel like the more clicking they do is the more work they're doing, or the faster they're doing something is the more work they're doing, and that's not the case. Less is very much more, so you really want to be particular about the reasons you're doing things, why you're doing what you're doing. Okay. And sometimes they feel like this is wasted time, like it's not actually doing anything to the actual DMP, or it's physically not doing anything, it's an extra thing, but it's you testing your work. So that's part of becoming good enough to work in the industry, is being able to criticize and look at your own work, correct it as you're going, and be okay with that. Be okay with telling yourself that that's not good enough, or that's not going to work, or this is not the right image, or that doesn't look like I want it to look. Okay. So generally for matte painting, I don't know, made this up. It's like a 15-minute rule. Okay. It's just something that I kind of invented and kind of started to think about, is that you'll bring images in and you'll be like, right, I'm going to drag loads of images, go to like textures, cgtextures.com, or you're going to go take loads of photos or whatever, bring loads of images in, and you'll be fighting with it with all these levels and hue saturations, etc. Right? So I usually say, if you can't get it looking right within 15 minutes, then try a different image. Okay. Just because the more of this stuff you're doing, the more you're destroying the image, the more you're fighting with it, just forcing it, trying to make it work. Okay. If this image works quite easily because it's matching the same lighting as is on the plate. Okay, so the plate is an overcast, cloudy day, and I know when I took this photo, it was the similar kind of lighting of the day. So for me, all I have to do is match the levels, the saturation, and a bit of additional dirt if I want it. But I know when taking the photo that it's going to be pretty easy to match from experience. Okay. But if this photo was taken when it was a sunnier day, more stuff going on, it's just not going to work. It's wasted time. So if you find yourself fighting with an image for more than 15 minutes, just stop fighting with it. Just find a different image. Okay. And try and work with that, because you're wasting a lot of time. Okay, you can easily work like 4 hours and have no progress, and when reality you could have just stopped doing it for a little bit and thought about a better way to approach it. Okay, so that's my DMP, and before I can take it into Nuke, I need to collapse it. Okay, so I've just collapsed it into a single layer. Okay, and I save out Photoshop files. Okay, everyone has their own way of doing it. Some people like to save out TIFFs to take into Nuke. Some people like EXRs. Every studio that you come across will have a different way of doing it. But I prefer Photoshop files, just because they seem to be quite solid and they work fairly well. Okay. I use this naming convention. Okay. Notice at the start I put 010. Okay. And for every layer that I do, I'll put another number here. We get rid of the copy. And for every layer, I'll go up in the numbers. I'll go 0, 020, 030, 040, 050. Okay, it's not common that you're going to have more than 10 layers of DMP in one shot. Okay, so you usually get to like 090 and then it stops. Okay, but if you find that you're like, oh, okay, I missed a layer and I want this one to go behind this one, I want this one to be in front of this one, then it's pretty simple. You just duplicate. I put 5 in there. Okay, and now that's what's in between. Okay, this is basic organization stuff. Okay, because you're going to be working, when you work in the industry, you're going to work with hundreds of different people. Okay, everything's changing. You're getting handed off a shot. You're getting given a shot. And me working on this shot, I know what order these layers are going to be working. But if I give it to someone else who hasn't worked on the shot and their only job is to maybe, right, I want you to compile what Luke has done. All I want you to do is just build it, the projections in Nuke. Okay, he's done it, but you know, he's on holiday today. I need you to whatever, do this. Yeah. So without me explaining anything, with these numbers here, that person will know, okay, cool, this layer's at the bottom, this one's at the top. Okay. It's not enough to just say background, midground, foreground. Okay, because I'm sure you're going to have more than 3 layers. Okay, and something might be a little bit more midground and something is a little bit more background and something is a little bit more foreground. But you know, so you need to really make it clear and make it real basic and easy for people to just kind of go, okay, cool, that makes sense, nice and simple. Okay, so we save our Photoshop file. Okay, I'm gonna go back into Nuke. We're gonna put the back here. Pardon me. Yeah. Okay, so this was our export. Okay, not concerned with this anymore. I'm going to come over here. Okay, so this is our plate again, right? And this is our Photoshop file. Okay, so you can see this section and that section are exactly the same. Okay, because we want the plate to work behind. The only thing we're affecting is this area here, right? So we want to have that in the background. Okay, so I have the plate here, which is Alfred. Okay. And I have my PSD. And in order to get the layers out of the PSD, you put a shuffle node. Okay. In the shuffle node, this section here, there's multiple shuffles actually, I think. So shuffle S. Yes, that's the one. Okay. So shuffle S is the one you want. And if you notice here, when I drop down, it remembers the layer that I've created. Okay. And this is all just linked with Photoshop. So every time you save a Photoshop file, you bring in a different, you add another layer in Photoshop, you go back into here, you click reload, and it will automatically, when you drop this down, it will bring that layer into here. Okay. There is a button here as well. I'll show you. Control V, Control V. Okay, if you want to be a little bit lazy, okay, you can press this. And notice here on the right, it said PSD options. Just hit breakout, and it automatically creates these. Okay. So it's automatically created me a layer for the background. It's automatically created me a layer for that layer, which is great. But the thing is, I might not like the way this is laid out. I don't like the fact that it's cropped for sure. And I might, you know, I like mine a bit more spaced out. I might want to add more things. So the amount of things I have to do to get it how I want it to be laid out and how I want it to be organized, I don't want it to be merged yet. I get rid of that. get rid of that. It's kind of like, okay, cool. Well, could have done it just faster, just without that automated button. But if you had maybe 10 layers, it might help you out. So there's that button there, breakout layers, which is quite useful. Good. So I have my shuffle, have my layer here. Okay. Automatically respects the alpha. Okay, but what you'll see is that I've done a little bit of a fix here. Okay. So can you see this error here with the alpha? I think it's up at the top as well. Okay, just there, right? And what that is a soft light layer that I did in Photoshop, okay, that didn't display in Photoshop, but it ends up showing in Nuke. Okay, this is one of the common things that you'll find is that Nuke has a 32-bit workflow, whereas Photoshop is not so good at doing 32-bit. So when you're working in Photoshop, you're usually working in 16-bit. And essentially, what this was probably shown in Photoshop, but it just wasn't as, as blatantly obvious, let's say. Okay. So instead of us having to go back to Photoshop to fix that, all I did was do a luminance key, set it to an alpha, okay, which means it's only going to affect the alpha of this image, okay, and I just crunched it, okay, so that's what it was, that's what it is, okay, it's just got rid of that bit on the edge, okay, same as if you did a mask in Photoshop and you just crunched the levels of that mask, that's exactly what's going on here, okay, it's just quicker than having to go back to Photoshop. Okay. I apply a pre-mult, okay, which essentially tells Nuke to use this alpha. It seems stupid. I don't know why you need to tell it to do this. But to avoid any edging issues, we just apply a pre-mult. Okay. So now that's our layer. Okay. Looking good. Okay. I'll just take this off. Okay, so now you can see that I've switched this guy. I've switched the cameras over. So when we were exporting, we had the cameras one way around. Okay. I've switched them over so now the projection is actually working with the projection camera. Okay. So I put them like that so that I know, right, that's quite obviously visually, that's telling me I have to switch them. Okay. Just because, even though I've been doing this for years, it's very possible that I mix up the cameras or get a little bit confused sometimes. So for it to be like, I know green is always my projection camera, red is always my animated camera. I put them switched over on purpose so that I know that I have to switch them back over. Okay, it's just helping myself out. It's watching my own back. Okay, so we project, and now we have our plate is on sphere. Our lovely Deliveroo shutter. Let's just see where. Okay, our Deliveroo shutter is on this plane. Okay, if we remember before, it's this guy here. Okay, so super simple. It's all, you can see how it's all linking together. And it, to be honest, poly count wise, it could be one poly. It doesn't need to be all these, but it could be one single poly. Okay. We again have our scanline render happening. So if we hit tab, we'll just go back to our 2D view. Okay. Okay. But now it's moving because we have our render cam is plugged into this scanline render. Okay, so we're projecting on a still image. Once those projections happen on a still image, then we're moving it all together. Right, so everything happens on a still image, and then once we've got it to our scanline renders, then that movement happens. Okay, so if you notice, I look at this one, and now this guy's moving. Right, and it's using the same camera, so the geometry is in the same place. It's using the same camera. There's no reason for it to not match up or line up. The only reason this might not is if you're using a different camera or your geometry is a bit skew if it's somewhere else, but it's not right. Okay. Be aware sometimes as well. Let's see. I'll do this in this one. Make sure that when you're working on something, it's either front or both. Okay. If it's back, then what you're saying is project onto the back faces of that geometry. Okay. In this instance, it's a plane, so it doesn't have any back faces. Okay. But if with the sphere, there are back faces, so you have to be careful just to make sure that this is either on front or both. Okay. So the more complex your geometry becomes, the more editing you have to do in Maya. So if you were to do something like, you know, a rock that's doing all these deforms and all that kind of stuff, and there's a lot of complex geometry and it's been ZBrushed and all that kind of joyful stuff, and then you paint on one section, but because of the complexity of the geometry, it starts throwing up projections on the backside and all that kind of stuff. That's when you have to start kind of going, right, I'm going to delete the backside of that rock because it's confusing my projection. That's when this front and both kind of comes into play. Okay, for the instances of this, it's a basic setup and we don't need to concern ourselves with it. But it's good to have an understanding of how that's going to feed into your work. Okay, so our scanline renders. Now our reformat. Now we've removed our ×4 guy over here because we don't need it to be ×4. Okay, we don't need it for that when we were painting on it. But now it's still that same quality, but now it's been shrunk to 1080p. So obviously basic digital stuff, you never upscale, you always downscale. So we've taken 7K, we put it into HD, and now we know that it's going to look really nice. Okay, we've got the resolution there to, you know, for when the camera moves in, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in quality. Okay. And then we use a merge node. This is when we want to merge. Okay. And that's now when they've become part of the same thing. Okay. If we wanted to edit in terms of our values, we can always just do that in Nuke. So I'm sure you've used a grade node. So we always do this stuff before the projections happen. Okay. This section up top can be as messy as you want. Okay. This bit can be like, right, grades, rotos, whatever, blah, blah, blah. As soon as it gets to this projection, nothing else should happen to it. Only this stuff, only the projection and keeping it clean. Because in industry, we actually render all of these separate strands. Okay? All of these separate layers get rendered, and then they just get supplied as an image that gets plugged in. So this section here would get rendered, that section there would get rendered, and then if we had any other layers, they would get rendered. Okay, and then that would get plugged in, and then that would get handed over to a compositor. Okay, because the compositor doesn't need to see all these grades, all this extra stuff that you've done. Okay, it's just heavier stuff. So that's why we keep it up here. It can also throw up errors, but we don't need to concern ourselves with that if we put it down here. Okay, so, and sometimes you'll find that doing grades in Nuke might, it feels a little bit nicer than doing it in Photoshop sometimes, because the information of color is better in Nuke. So you can see I have control over just blowing it up, but I'm not going to just no. 0.5. I'll do. Yeah. I just felt like it needed a little bit of a boost. It's feeling a little bit dark. Yeah. Yeah. So this is our plate. Okay, we've done our Deliveroo sign or whatever we want to do, and we still have it alphaed. Okay, toggling the A. Okay, so now I want to replace the sky. Okay, the great thing is we've already masked it, so now we know that anything we put connected to it it's just gonna work automatically. Okay, so I've gathered some skies. Okay, I usually go to I think it's HDRI Haven. That's a good kind of like free sky sourcing website. And skies are just, standard bread and butter for matte painters. It's every single shot in a film requires replacement of sky. I can't think of any shot I've ever worked on that hasn't needed some sort of sky work. Okay, whether it's inside in a green screen, then it obviously needs all that built, or even if it's outside on set, the sky usually needs something. Okay, it's usually just because it needs to be a higher resolution at least, but it usually needs to look nicer. Okay, so I've picked out a few skies that I think could work. Okay, and remember, I'm keeping in mind that this is an overcast day, so there's not, it's a bit of room to play, but there's not too much. I don't want to. I can't pick a sunny sky. That's not going to work. Okay, it's just not. It's not going to look right. Okay. So it's two ways that we work with skies in the industry. We build on a 360 like this. Okay, so you always build your scene. So you can imagine that your whole CG scene with all your characters and all your environment, that's all going to sit within this world. Okay, so let's just say it. Zoom out. Yep. Okay. So this is a sky that I like anyway. Let's just take these off. Okay, just pop it onto the sphere. Okay, your world is going to sit inside this sphere. Everything else doesn't really matter. This is our world. Okay. So when you build it, it's usually going to be a sphere like this. And then the only other edit on skies in the industry will be if specifically an angle that needs more work than this 360 sky is given me. Okay, so in that instance, if we replace the sky for this shot, let's say this sky was built from a 360 sky like the sphere that I've just shown, it works for every other shot in the sequence, but it doesn't work for this shot. In this case, that's when you'd take this frame out, you'd take it into Photoshop, and you'd paint the sky separately for this shot. Okay, so you can either do it that way, or you can paint on this HDR. Okay, which is, there's pros and cons to both. Okay, and that you'll find this situation will throw up in industry. You'll find that this throws up a situation because you might think that 8K is big, but standard for most skies that you're going to work on is going to be at least 20, 25K up to 30K images. And when you're trying to navigate where that camera is facing in that, little square of, this section here, it can get a bit painful going back and forth between Photoshop and Nuke to kind of make it look pretty for, just a little bit of a, the director might say, I want some more cloud detail down here, but only down here. So then you got to find where is that little section on my big 20K image of sky? Okay, which can be a little bit of a pain. So you either approach it like that, or you approach it as a single shot, and then you go, right, I'm going to just paint in the sky here. So that's how you approach skies in the industry. Okay. So here I've chosen my sky. I put a grade. Okay, so these grades and saturations make more sense once it's plugged in. Okay. Chuck it onto a sphere. I make sure that sphere is huge. Okay, because it's the world essentially to this shot. Okay, so there's no way, if I go into this sphere, there's no way this building is going to be this big, and this is my sphere settings. The sky is going to be that big. There's no way. Okay, it's miles and miles and miles away from us. It's going to be at least that, if not more. It could be even further, but then you're coming into like cropping issues. Okay, so you make sure that your globe in tiles everything in your scene. Okay, and then you can put it on your scanline render again. Okay. And again, you need to plug in the camera. Okay, same camera, because if we don't, then this sky has got no understanding of where it's facing. Okay, it's now there's no connection between this sky and your scene. Okay, so now I merge. Okay, and now I have my sky in the background. Okay, I've also told it here, you can see that when you create a merge, create a merge by pressing M, or you can just tab and merge. Okay. You also have a handle here for mask. So if you'll notice on this piece, I've told it to mask from the above. Okay, so it's this merge is respecting this mask now. Okay. So then I have my shot there done. Nice. So what's the great thing about this is that now with my sphere, if I want, I know this works. I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Okay. And now I can change the values in my rotation and just kind of go around. Okay, which one do I like? Okay, I mean, I'm going to go with what I had or something like that. So, but this is the power of putting onto a sphere rather than trying to make it look good for one shot. So you can creatively kind of have a play with it. You're like, oh, okay, cool. That looks pretty cool. Oh, that's pretty cool. You know, obviously you have to respect. Again, you have to respect. Not you can't just pick any sky. You know, it's got to match the plate. You're always respecting the plate. That's always what you're matching. If you ever get into a situation that you're like, oh, I don't know where I'm heading with this, I don't know what I'm matching, just match the plate. Okay, so if you get a CG render and you're doing DMP for it, okay, whatever the CG people or lighting people or whoever's signed off on the look of it, the lighting, the rendering, that's what you're matching. Okay. So if the sun is over on the left and it's hitting this building this side, that means your HDR, your sky, the sun's got to be over here. Okay. You have a little bit of room with a little bit of a, you know, axis kind of, you know, where you can change it. You can, you know, if you wanted to, you could translate. See, it's not going to make a huge difference. So I can move it up a little bit. You can see the sky is kind of moving up and down. You have a little bit, but it doesn't take much for it to be a little bit weird. Now we've screwed the perspective, right? So you have creativity, but within reason. Okay. Right. So then we have our shot, and now everything's working fine. Okay. So that's like a basic introduction to projections. Okay, they can get way more complex. You can have extremely complex settings. You can have multiple objects. You can build whole scenes just from projections. You don't even need CG. But this is good practice. This is a technique that sorry, keep disappearing. This layout of things is a good practice for how you should lay out your matte painting. Okay, this is a layout that I've taught lots and lots of people, and I hope to show a lot of other people this layout of things, because it makes it very easy to select things like this, keeping everything organized, keeping everything clear. And yeah, the possibilities are endless.